The horn of a cruise ship cut through the morning air, reverberating through the water and reflecting off the steel walls of the port hangars, and in this sound, full of unceremonious fun and inappropriate solemnity, it seemed to me a mocking echo of fate, as if the ocean itself, spreading its vast embrace, openly mocked me, a woman who, at the age of 65, she stood alone at the edge of the pier, clutching a neatly packed floral suitcase, the purchase of which recently seemed like the beginning of something new, fresh, and long-awaited. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. On the screen of the phone, which I was holding as if it could drop me into the abyss at any moment, a short message from my son was still glowing. 6 words, extremely simple, but so heavy that they seemed to pull my chest down, squeezing from me inside and leaving behind a feeling as if someone had tightened the belt around his heart, preventing him from breathing. Plans have changed. Instead, I'm taking my new girlfriend with me. I reread these words over and over again, as if a miracle could happen from repeating them, and the letters, yielding to my will, would suddenly form into another, more acceptable phrase, one in which I still exist as a part of his world, like a mother with whom he was going to spend a few days, the ones about which he spoke with such fervor, promising that it would be a journey just for the two of us, just like in the old days, when he was just a boy and I was his heroine, his home. But the phrase did not change. And the sun didn't get any less bright. And the liner did not stop filling up with passengers, whose laughter cut my ears like shards of broken glass, because each of them had someone nearby, a companion, family, friend, and I was left alone. My new blue dress, chosen with such care, with fittings, hesitations, and weighing of every penny spent, now seemed not an outfit, but a uniform of abandonment, and the shoes in which I had barely learned to walk without pain suddenly seemed inappropriately elegant, as if they were meant for someone else living a different life. The ticket that I had kept in my document drawer for so long was now just a piece of paper, with no addressee, no destination, and no meaning. People passed by, their steps sounded confident, their laughter was free, their hands reached out to each other. They were on their way, they were needed by someone, someone was waiting for them. And I stood there, forgotten, with trembling fingers, taking a selfie in which my unused passport was visible, and I tried to smile, hoping that this smile would become a lifeline that would help me not to drown. But the eyes weren't laughing, the eyes knew the truth. "Madam, are you landing?" The steward's voice was polite, but there was impatience in it. It wasn't for me, it was for someone else who was destined to be a part of this journey. "No," I replied, slowly straightening up, as if lifting myself from the weight of my own disappointment. "Not anymore." The taxi ride home dragged on for an excruciatingly long time, not because the way was far, but because every turn, every movement seemed slow, like in a dream where you try to run, but your feet get stuck in invisible mud. The city outside the window was blurring like a watercolor in the rain, and I, sitting in the back seat, looked through this blur, feeling how empty it was inside, as empty as I had never been before. This was not the first time that Gaspard betrayed my hopes. He betrayed my expectations more than once, did not call, canceled meetings, disappeared, but this time was special. He did it publicly, defiantly, as if he wanted to emphasize that his new life did not include me, that the role of mother was over for him. And now I'm just a memory that he's trying to get rid of. And it was this realization that hurt the most. I returned to my small apartment, familiar to the last speck of dust, where the walls kept silence so deep that it rang in my ears, and put my suitcase on the threshold like a forgotten trophy of a failed trip, not having the strength to unpack it or even move it. I sat down in an armchair, lost in it, as if in the arms of an old friend, and did not even reach for the light switch when dusk fell. The evening came without light, but also without tears. There was an old photograph on the table next to it. Gaspard was still a child, smiling with those same slit, like teeth, his arms wrapped around my neck, and in his eyes was love, endless, pure, not yet spoiled by adult disappointments. I turned the photo down, not because I wanted to forget, but because I couldn't look anymore. I didn't cry that night. Not because I didn't want to, but because crying would mean that I was still hoping, still believing. And I'm not anymore. After making strong tea, I went out onto the balcony, where the night sky was filled with stars, lighting up the lights in the dark sky one by one, and in this contemplation there was something that could not be called peace, but could be called determination. It was then that something changed in me. The next morning, I called my friend Gilda. She always knew how to listen, even when the words didn't immediately form in my head, even when the feelings, too dense and stuck inside, couldn't find a way out. When she heard my voice, she immediately realized that something important had happened. I had just started talking when I heard her stifled sigh on the phone, almost gasping, "Oh, Enrica, I'm so sorry." She said sincerely, without falseness, without banal sympathy, just like a human being. "Don't be." I replied, surprised at the firmness with which my words sounded, the directness with which I had previously spoken only in my thoughts, but not out loud. I think I needed it. It was necessary for my own son to finally show himself. I needed to finally see the truth. I stood looking at the suitcase, still unpacked, as a symbol of the trip that did not happen, but which opened my eyes. It was time to stop waiting for Gaspard to become the son I always wanted him to be, and start seeing him for who he is. Over the next few weeks, I developed a routine that was simple at first, even a little depressing, but it made sense every day. I walked in the park every morning, inhaling the smell of wet earth and freshly cut grass, listening to the birds singing, the wind rustling in the leaves, and for the first time in a long time I allowed myself to walk without haste, without purpose, just for the pleasure of moving. I joined a book club at the local library, where women my age and slightly younger discussed novels, philosophical essays, and even poetry, and I found myself thinking that I was really interested in what they thought, and I had something to say in response. On Wednesdays, I volunteered in a community garden, pruning roses, watering greenery, and talking to neighbors. Small things, it would seem, nothing significant, but in each of them there was a drop of my will, my choice, my new life, which was slowly but surely taking shape. One day, when I was pruning roses at the fence, a woman with curly hair and a cheeky smile invited me to join her pottery class. "I have two left hands," I protested, almost automatically, as I always did when something new caused alarm. "I had them too when I started," she laughed. "Come on, Enrica, what have you got to lose?" And really, what? The pottery studio was located in a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and huge windows that let in soft light, as if specially created for creative work. The instructor, a woman in her 50s named Adriana, with black hair in which silver did not seem old, but rather wisdom, and hands always stained with clay, greeted me with such warmth, as if she had known me for many years. "For the first time?" she asked, leading me to the potter's wheel. "Lately, everything happens for the first time," I confessed, and she nodded understandingly. "That's usually when the best things happen." The first attempts were really a disaster. Curves, unstable shapes that disintegrated as soon as I dared to push a little harder, but there was something almost meditative about the cool, soft clay, obedient if you pay attention, in the rhythm of the rotating circle, in the concentration necessary to catch the center, not only in the material, but also and in myself. During those 2 hours, I didn't think about Gaspard, the cruise, or all the broken expectations. My attention was entirely here and now, in the clay between my palms. "Not bad for a beginner," Adriana said, looking at my uneven bowl. "You have good instincts." I chuckled, almost laughing. "My instincts haven't served me well lately." She wiped her hands on her apron and added thoughtfully, "Maybe you just weren't listening to the right ones." I came back the following week. And a week later. And then, again. In the third week, Adriana approached me with a suggestion. "Would you like to help prepare a lesson for the children on Saturday?" "I would have paid you, of course. I'm not looking for a job," I replied almost reflexively. She tilted her head to the side, looked at him with a slight smile. "Aren't you? Everyone is looking for something." I started working in the studio 2 mornings a week, and this rhythm suddenly became a source of peace. The silence before the students arrived, the methodical preparation of the clay, the feeling of satisfaction that the empty shelves were filled with materials, opportunities, and hope. Adriana and I had lunch together, sharing stories, at first cautiously, in fragments, and then openly, laughing, wondering, listening. "You never talk about your family," she once remarked. I looked down at my plate. "There's nothing to tell," she replied without looking up. "Everyone has a story, Enrica," she said, and there was no judgment in her gaze. "Mine are not interesting. A single mother. I worked a lot. I raised my son, who now has his own life." Adriana nodded. "I've been married for 20 years to a man who made me feel invisible. When he left, everyone thought I was going to break down. And I opened a studio." She smiled. "Sometimes the story we think we're living is not the one we should be telling." Those words stayed with me. The weeks passed, turning into months. My apartment began to change. Ceramic bowls, vases, funny figurines, bright chair covers, plants on the windowsills appeared on the shelves. I painted the living room a sunny yellow, took down old photographs from the walls, which were more oppressive than inspiring, and hung new ones, paintings from a local gallery, where the colors screamed about life. And then, 6 months after the cruise, which didn't happen, on Sunday afternoon, the doorbell rang. Gaspard stood in the doorway, unshaven, with red eyes, looking 10 years older. "Mom." His voice was trembling. "I need help." I froze in the doorway, between the familiar pain of my mother's response and the new feeling of my own hardness. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Everything is falling apart. I lost my job. Inez left me. I'm being evicted. You're the only one I can turn to." His eyes, so similar to mine, were full of tears. For a moment, I stood in the harbor again, where the words of his message pierced me, and the ship's horn echoed in my ears. I felt the weight of all the years, all the wounds, all the senseless hopes. But I also felt, for the first time, power. A woman who has built a new life. A woman who is not so easy to break. "Mom." Gaspard held out his hand. "You've always been there for me. I know I don't deserve this, but I need you now more than ever before." I was really looking at him for the first time. And I made a decision. I stepped back, clearing the passage. "Come in," I said, and my voice was smooth, calm, like the surface of a lake. Gaspard entered, and his gaze darted around the room. "You've changed," he said, noticing the changes. "I've redone a lot," I replied, closing the door. "Sit down. Do you want some tea?" He nodded, collapsing onto the couch, the one that had absorbed so much in its life, from the sounds of his teenage laughter to the traces of spilled lemonade, from the traces of dirty sneakers to the quiet evening sobs when, as a teenager, he tried to cope with something he didn't say out loud, and without asking any questions. I just left sandwiches and tea on a tray for him while I could barely stand on my own after the second shift, but I ironed his t-shirts anyway and cleaned the room. I went to the kitchen, not because tea was so necessary, but because it was my respite, an opportunity to be alone for a few minutes, to feel clarity begin to flow through my veins again, as a decision took shape that might be destined to change our way of life forever. When I returned, holding 2 steaming mugs in my hands, Gaspard was examining one of my ceramic works, the very small, uneven bowl covered with dark blue glaze, in which for the first time I felt that I could create something new with my own hands, out of chaos and clay. "Did you do that?" he asked without looking up. "Yes," I replied calmly, putting down the tea. "Now tell me what's going on." As if a dam had burst, a stream of words poured out of him, as if all the accumulated pain, frustration, and fatigue from his own inadequacy had suddenly found a way out. He told me how he spent too much money on that cruise, how Inez, his last lover, eventually chose a man with big ambitions, as he put it, how his drinking got out of control again, and he, trying to cope with the emptiness, began to skip days at work until in the end, he didn't get fired. It all sounded familiar, predictable, like an old script that you get tired of before the third act. He finished shortly, almost matter-of-factly. I just need somewhere to stay. Just until I get back on my feet. A couple of weeks at most. Old Enrica, the one who lived in anxiety and self-sacrifice, would have immediately said yes, given him her bed, settled herself on the couch, laid out her last savings, the ones she carefully collected for a rainy day, and believed again that now everything would change. But I wasn't that Enrica anymore. No, I said softly, almost tenderly, like a doctor telling a patient that everything will be different, but the truth cannot be ignored. He blinked, confusion mixed with disbelief, as if I'd said something unthinkable. You can't stay here, gasped. He placed the bowl on the table with a thud. Mom, I don't think you understand. I have nowhere to go. I met his gaze. I understand perfectly, I said, surprised at my own calmness, and I'm sorry that you're struggling. But I can't help you this time. His face changed, darkened with resentment, like the sky before a thunderstorm. Can't or won't you? His voice rose. I sipped my tea to give myself a break, so as not to respond too abruptly. What happened to the cruise money I sent you? $3,000, gasped. It was my money. He looked away, his shoulders slumped. Everything was tight. Inez wanted to go somewhere decent. He muttered. So you used the money I set aside for a trip together to take your girlfriend on a luxury cruise, I said, slowly and clearly. I'm going to give you the money back, he began, his voice cracking, and it's not like you couldn't afford it. I know about your pension fund. I sat up straight, feeling a wave rise inside me, not rage, but firmness. The foundation that I founded when you were born, I said, the foundation that I've been protecting all these years, saving a little bit, even when I had to eat soup out of a bag and do the laundry by hand. You asked for this money twice, for a wedding and for a business that never happened. It's not about money, gasped. It's about respect. About responsibility. About the borders. He jumped up, excited, almost shouting, boundaries? I am your son. I'm a family. I stood up too, looking at him. Yes, you are my son. And I love you. But loving you doesn't mean letting you ruin my life over and over again. Not anymore. That's it. He recoiled as if he'd been slapped. Are you just going to throw me out on the street? His voice cracked, tears welled up in his eyes. You've always been there for me. Always. Why not now? This tone, familiar to the point of pain, always broke me before, caused guilt, made me doubt. But now. It was different now. I felt my roots, my foundation, as if the clay in my hands had finally taken shape. I'll help you find resources, I said, trying to keep my voice level. There are housing assistance programs, addiction counseling. I have no problems. He shouted, I just need you to behave like a mother. At least once in my life. Those words hit his chest like a fist. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. But then, from somewhere inside, a voice rose, not loud, but firm, gasped. I said, I've spent my entire adult life trying to be everything you need. I worked 3 jobs when you were a kid so that you could have everything that others had. I helped you with your studies, got you out of jail, and paid for your first and second weddings. I answered every call you made in the middle of the night. I lent you money knowing you wouldn't pay it back. I justified you to my family, to my friends, to myself. And all this time, I kept believing that one day you would grow up. That one day you will see me, not just as a mother, as a convenience shoulder, as a resource. But as a person. A woman who has her own boundaries, her own needs, her own dreams. I paused, watching him catch his breath, as the words slowly sank into his mind, as the polished clay took on a new curve under pressure. Love does not mean destruction. It does not mean sacrifice. I'll be there, but not like before. I'll help you find the way. But it's up to you to follow it. Gaspert's face contorted, as if my words had suddenly torn off his thin mask of restraint, behind which he was trying in vain to hide his own vulnerability and, perhaps, shame mixed with stubbornness. "This is unfair," he growled, and in his voice, as well as in his clenched fists, trembled an almost childish resentment, painfully familiar, the one that he carried from his adolescence into adulthood, unable to outgrow it. "I've had difficulties that you don't understand." I nodded slowly, remaining calm, although everything inside was bubbling, not from anger, but from pain, from fatigue, from decades of unrequited attempts. "Everyone has difficulties," Gaspard, I said softly but confidently. "The difference is how we deal with them." I moved to the door, not because I wanted to get him out as soon as possible, but because I knew that if I didn't take this step now, if I backed down, then everything would start all over again. "I think it's time for you to leave." He froze as if in disbelief, and then his voice broke, rising to a hoarse pitch. "Are you seriously kicking me out?" I took a deep breath. "I prefer not to save you this time," I replied, emphasizing each word as if reciting a spell that could finally free us both. "There is a difference." His face became hard, as if all the light that still remained in his expression had gone, leaving only bitterness. "Okay," he said through gritted teeth. "I don't need you anyway. I've never needed it." He abruptly grabbed his jacket, almost ripping it out from behind the back of the chair. "Don't expect me to come running when you're old and lonely and there's no one to take care of you." The door slammed shut with such force that the glass in the window shook, as if disturbed by a sudden storm. I sank down on the sofa, into which he had just pressed himself, and where I now felt the residual warmth of his body, like a trace of the love that he could not express except in reproaches. My hands were shaking, not from fear, not from doubt, but from how hard it was to do what I knew was necessary. I felt drained, as if after a long illness, but at the same time a little lighter, as if I had lifted a huge, age-old burden from my shoulders. I've imagined this scene so many times, mentally rehearsed the dialogues, and prepared for its inevitability, but the reality turned out to be no less painful than I feared. The next day, I wrote to Adriana that I would not be able to come to the studio, citing indisposition, not daring to describe everything that was boiling inside me. I couldn't look people in the eye. I couldn't tell why my chest felt like it was being squeezed by a hoop, why every breath resonated somewhere in my stomach. Anger, pain, guilt, relief, all mixed up in such a complex cocktail that even the body responded with physical weakness. Around noon, I received a message from Adriana. "I miss you today. Is everything okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time before answering, typing briefly, "Family problems. I'll be fine." The answer came immediately, "My doors are always open." And not only studio ones. That evening, I found myself driving towards her house, a small, cozy house on the outskirts of the city, where I had not dared to look before, as if into the holy of holies of her personal, inviolable life. Adriana greeted me in a paint-splattered jumpsuit, with glasses pushed up on top of her head, with that expression on her face that didn't require words. "I brought the wine," I said, holding out the bottle, trying to smile. "And I'll bring glasses," she replied with that light smile that always felt like something more: acceptance, peace, friendship. We sat on the back porch as the sunset turned the sky orange and copper, casting long shadows over her sprawling garden, which was full of colors and scents, and where every plant seemed to be in its place, despite the apparent chaos. I told her everything, about the cruise, about Gaspard, about his abrupt appearance and equally abrupt departure, about my indecision, about the decision that broke the old part of me, but gave life to a new one. The words came out of my mouth like water from an overflowing vessel, and I didn't stop them. They were breaking free because they couldn't live inside anymore. Adriana listened in silence, not interrupting, not appreciating, just being there. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, looking at her wine. Finally she said, "I think you did what was necessary. For both of you. It's not pleasant. But the right things are rarely pleasant in the beginning. She reached out and squeezed my hand lightly, not as a consolation, but as a confirmation. You are not alone. But that doesn't make them wrong. That night, for the first time since Gaspard left, I allowed myself to cry. Not quietly, not stealthily, but really, deep, heavy sobs that seemed as ancient as the very pain of motherhood. I was crying because of that boy who used to run towards me with his arms open with a gap-toothed smile. Because of a teenager with whom we couldn't find a common language. Because of the man I loved, but who didn't know how to love back. I cried for all my mistakes, real and imagined, for every time I put his needs above my own. But most of all, I cried for myself, for that woman who had forgotten who she was beyond the role of a mother, who was lost, lived in expectation, loved beyond measure, but had forgotten about herself for too long. We stayed at Adriana's until late at night. The conversation, smoothly changing the subject, turned into a frank, almost intimate narrative about her life after the divorce, about how she rediscovered her passion for creativity at the age of 40, how she built a studio on the wreckage of a ruined marriage, filled it with light, sounds, shapes, and created a place that became a home not only for clay, but also for souls looking for a new beginning. I never thought that I would find myself at this age, she confessed. I've always believed that life is what happens to you, not what you create yourself. I nodded, feeling those words sink into my heart like seeds into fertile soil. I'm still learning, I replied. When I finally returned home, to the silence, to the soft semi-darkness of the familiar walls, I realized that something inside me had changed. The guilt was still with me, like an old shadow, but it loosened its grip. I did the right thing. Uncomfortable, scary, necessary. Now I had to keep moving forward. In the following weeks, I immersed myself in my work in the studio, allowing myself to lose myself in simple but fulfilling activities, kneading clay, explaining basic techniques, and watching students with uncertain hands touch the material from which shapes are born for the first time. Adriana, as if sensing that I was ready for the next step, suggested that I try to teach a beginner class, and to my own surprise, I not only agreed, but also felt pleasure rising from somewhere deep inside, real, quiet, like a spring stream breaking through the snow. There was something in this process that I always missed, the opportunity to be useful without sacrificing myself, the opportunity to see the spark of creativity ignite in others, to see them moving forward, albeit with doubts. It's been a little over 2 months since Gaspard slammed the door behind him, when a letter without a return address appeared on my kitchen table. I immediately recognized his handwriting, the same careless, sprawling letters with which he used to leave me notes on the refrigerator when he was a child. Mom, he's gone to Marco. Don't forget to buy some cereal. My heart began to race, and I sat down before opening the envelope, anticipating everything, accusations, reproaches, and maybe even pleas. But there was only one page inside. Mom, I'm at the Nazareth Rehabilitation Center. This is a 90-day program. They say that part of recovery is making amends, but I'm not ready for that yet. I'm still mad at you, but the counselor says I have to tell you where I am. Don't come. I'll contact you when I'm ready. Gaspard. I read the letter 3 times. Emotions struggled inside me like waves in a storm. I'm proud that he finally accepted help. The pain of his incessant anger, which never seemed to run out. Relief that he's safe, at least physically. And again, the desire, almost unbearable, to rush to him, hug him, tell him that I'm here. But my new understanding of boundaries, what I've been painfully but persistently building over the past few months, has held me back. I folded the letter carefully, put it in my desk drawer, and closed it, as if hiding a living, throbbing heart that wasn't ready to beat next to another one yet. Then I picked up the phone and dialed Adriana's number. Are you still planning for the gallery to open next month? I asked, as casually as I could. Yes, of course, she replied. Why is that? I think I'm ready to imagine something. If the offer is still valid, I glanced at the potter's wheel, which I recently installed in the room where I used to store old furniture and winter jackets. It's always been there, she replied warmly. Come back tomorrow, we'll discuss everything. I stayed in my little makeshift studio late that night. The light fell from a single-floor lamp, the circle rotated evenly, and the clay yielded like an obedient student, forming between my palms into something new, a shape that had not existed before. I thought about Gaspard, how hard it is to let go, and how, despite fear, it is important to hold on to yourself. The resulting product was not perfect. The walls were too thin in one place, and the glaze was uneven in another, but it was mine, and it had everything: anxiety, love, perseverance, and hope. When I was about to put everything away, the phone rang. I took it, wiping my hands on my apron, expecting Adriana to write about tomorrow's meeting. But the name that made me freeze was reflected on the screen: David. My heart skipped a beat, and the air became thick, like before a thunderstorm. The message was short: I've heard about Gaspard. We need to talk. I'll be in town next week. David. The man who left 35 years ago. Who didn't pay a cent of alimony. Who disappeared and reappeared like the moon in an unpredictable sky, each time bringing only pain and new questions. David, whom Gaspard idolized all his life, perhaps precisely because he was not around, because in his absence Gaspard could paint him to perfection. I stared at the screen, and a familiar chill rose in me, the same fear that always arose when it seemed that I was starting to find my footing, when suddenly the ground under my feet began to shake again. I didn't answer that night. She didn't answer in the morning either. I thought this feeling would pass, but instead I received a new message: Enrica, please. Gaspard needs both parents now. I almost laughed out loud. Both parents? Where has he been all these years? Where was his involvement, his care, his support, when I didn't know how to pay the rent, how to feed my son, how to deal with his tears when he called his father at night? You're frowning at that phone as if it had personally offended you, Adriana remarked as we arranged the ceramic works in the gallery, preparing for the opening. I sighed and put the phone back in my pocket. Ex-husband. Gaspard's father. Suddenly he decided to remember that he was a parent. Adriana raised an eyebrow. The plot is spinning. I shook my head. There is no plot. Just a man who thinks he can come back to life when it's convenient for him, as if it's a hotel where they always keep a room for him. I tried to focus on the arrangement of the works, on the choice of lighting, on the selection of cards with names. But inside, everything was vibrating. Because despite all these years, despite how much I had to endure, his voice still lived somewhere inside. And now I had to decide whether I would let him take back the place he had long lost. I carefully placed a vase created by one of the students on a pedestal, admiring how the sunlight, filtering through the stained glass window of the gallery, glided over its rough surface, lingering on the irregularities and emphasizing the tremulous but sincere uncertainty of the first attempts. I'd been coping with everything without David since Gaspard was 5 years old. Everything I've achieved is hard, built out of pain, out of anxiety, out of endless compromises, and I didn't need him, the man who wasn't there when I needed him most, to suddenly decide that his return was necessary. We don't need him right now. Maybe Gaspard needs it, Adriana said softly, and I felt my fingers squeeze the ceramic bowl a little harder than they should have. I stopped, holding the cup in my hands like a fragile truth that could crack with any wrong move. What do you mean? I asked, unwilling but forced to hear the answer. Adriana looked at me, her gaze attentive but not judgmental. You said that Gaspard is recovering. It's a vulnerable time. His father's appearance can be difficult, yes. It can do harm. But it can also heal. I shook my head, feeling all the old things that I had been keeping under lock and key rise up in my chest. David has a habit of making grand appearances and equally spectacular disappearances. He bursts in, promises, smiles, and then disappears, leaving behind emptiness and disappointment. Gaspard doesn't need that right now. Adriana thought for a second before asking a question that caught me off guard. What do you need? I was confused. It's not about me, is it? I tried to brush it off, but she shook her head. From everything you've told me, I hear one thing. You've spent your life creating everything around Gaspard. Maybe it's time to make some decisions based on what Enrique needs. Her words continued to ring in my head as I drove home, weaving through the evening traffic as if between my own thoughts, no less chaotic than the traffic. What did I need? The question seemed almost defiant, almost blasphemous. My needs have always been secondary, first Gaspard, then work, then the need to just survive. Be strong, be responsible, be reliable. And now that I finally got the space to think, I didn't know where to start. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and went out to my small balcony. The spring evening was mild, the sky was already turning a deep purple, and couples, families, teenagers with headphones, and dogs were passing by below, dragging their owners to the park or home. My phone rang. The name appeared on the screen again, David. I'm at the West Side Hotel, room 312. Please, Enrica. For Gaspard. Always for Gaspard. It's never easy for me. Never because it's the right thing to do, because he has to. Before I could change my mind, I sent a short reply, tomorrow at 2200 hours. Not in your hotel. A coffee shop on the corner of Main and 4th. He replied almost immediately, I'll be there. Thank you. I didn't sleep well that night. The past came back to me in shaky, painful dreams. David holds baby Gaspard, looking proud but scared. Then there was a scene with a cake and candles for Gaspard's decade, and an empty chair next to it because David had an emergency at work. The last visit was when Gaspard was 15, and he was waiting for his father with a backpack, ready for camping, with such a light in his eyes, like a child who believes in miracles. But David did not come, and then I stroked my son's hair, not knowing how to explain why adults promise and do not fulfill. The coffee shop was full of people when I arrived. The aromas of freshly ground coffee and cinnamon were in the air, and the tables were occupied by evening buzzing companies. I immediately saw David. He was sitting in a corner booth, and despite the decades, I recognized in him the man who once seemed to me to be everything, the answer, the support, the beginning of a new life. His hair had turned silver at the temples, but he was still wearing that button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. When he saw me, he stood up. Enrica, thank you for coming. I nodded, sliding into the seat opposite. The waitress came over, and I ordered black coffee. I needed its bitterness, its unmistakable directness. You look good, he said as soon as we were alone. Really good. I looked at him, not smiling. Let's skip the pleasantries, I said. You wrote that you wanted to talk about Gaspard. He sighed and ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen Gaspard do 1,000 times. Always straight to the point, he muttered. Some things don't change. I replied without looking away, and some people have to change. Why are you here, David? You haven't been a father to Gaspard for 35 years. He froze. It's not fair, he finally said, and I heard in his voice the same strained resentment that I heard so often in my youth. I tried, did I try? I repeated, and the words sounded sharper than I expected. Greeting cards every few years. A phone call for Christmas, if you're lucky. One visit a year, followed by disappearance and broken promises. Is that what you call an attempt? This is not an attempt, David. It's an illusion of fatherhood. The appeared, disappeared model, which caused more harm than good. And I'm not going to let you repeat that now, not at a time when my son is trying to get back on his feet. He was silent, and I could see something flashing in his eyes, maybe shame, maybe fatigue, but I didn't need his remorse. I needed him to understand that his time had already passed. The waitress returned with my coffee, and I instinctively wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling the warmth seep through my fingers, like an anchor in this shaky, unstable conversation in which every word had a weight that could change the trajectory of not only the current moment, but everything that could happen next. I was grateful for this mug, for the opportunity to focus on something tangible, and not on the man in front of me, with whom I was connected by a life full of fragments of hopes, disappointments, and endlessly unspoken feelings. "I know I've made mistakes," he said after the waitress left, "huge, unforgivable mistakes. But Gaspard called me, Enrica. From the rehabilitation center. He's in trouble and he reached out." With these words, something cold and heavy settled in my stomach, like a pebble thrown into a quiet lake. "He called you. Last week. He didn't mention it in the letter." He sounded lost, David continued. "He said he's finally hit rock bottom." He leaned forward, and there was a concentration in his voice that made me uneasy. "He told me what happened between you about the cruise. About how you rejected him." "I didn't reject him," I said, and I heard a defensive note in my voice, harsh and unnatural. "I refuse to continue saving him. There is a difference." Surprisingly, David nodded. "I know. You did the right thing, Enrica. It took courage." I stared at him, trying to figure out if it was sincerity or a new mask, a new attempt to gain trust. "Why are you really here?" I asked bluntly. He looked at me for the first time in a real way, without the charming charm that once captivated me, but with fatigue and, barely perceptible, repentance. "Because I owe him. And you. I missed a lot. He hurt me. And because I am also in the process of recovery. I'll be sober for 5 years in a month." Those words hit me harder than I expected. "David. An alcoholic." "You're an alcoholic," I repeated, as if testing how this confession sounded. "I was. And I always will be," he replied with a slight, almost philosophical shrug. "I'm working step by step. I make amends where I can. Gaspard doesn't know yet. I would like him to hear it from me personally." I took a sip of my coffee, letting the bitterness of the drink balance out the turmoil inside. It explained a lot, his disappearances, forgotten dates, sudden mood swings. But an explanation is not an excuse. "What do you want from me, David?" I finally asked, too tired to circle. "Your blessing, I suppose. Or at least not your resistance." He fidgeted with the napkin, and this gesture seemed painfully familiar to me. "I would like to visit Gaspard at Nazareth and talk to him like a father to his son. Tell him your story. If he wants to hear it." "And then what?" I squinted. "Will you disappear again when it gets hard?" The bitterness that I had so carefully learned to suppress surfaced abruptly, without warning. "No," he replied firmly. "Not this time. I've changed, Enrica. The work I've done in the recovery process is real. I'm not pretending that I can redeem the past, but I can take care of the future. Whatever it is." I studied his face, trying to pick up on the familiar signals, those small facial movements that over the years I had learned to perceive as signs of a lie. But instead of the old and vulnerable self, confidence, instead of a sly grin, I saw something else, humility. Probably genuine. Probably temporary. But it was there. "Gaspard might not want to see you," I warned. "I respect his choice," he nodded. "And if he doesn't want to, I'll be there anyway. I'll show up. I'll do what I have to do. Not for recognition. For him." I nodded, no longer as an ex-wife, not as the woman he had once betrayed, but as a mother who understood that support does not mean approval, that you can support a person without indulging his previous behavior. "You make it sound so simple," I muttered. "But it's not like that." He grinned, and there was no mockery in that grin, just weariness. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Minor but necessary things that rarely seem right at the moment. An echo of Adriana's words, unpleasant but necessary, sounded in my memory. I narrowed my eyes. "You're meeting someone in the studio." A woman. Her name was Adriana. He froze, surprised, it seems, not that I know about it, but that it even matters. "It doesn't matter," I shook my head. "Listen, David. I can't stop you from contacting Gaspard. He's an adult. But I also won't make it easy for you. Whatever relationship you're building now is your job, not mine." He nodded. "That's fair enough. More than fair. Considering everything." We finished our coffee in an awkward but no longer hostile silence. I felt my body gradually relax, as if a weight that had been hanging for decades had lifted a little. As I reached for my purse to leave, David spoke again. "There's something else." He pulled a thin envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket and carefully placed it on the table. "This is for you. Not for Gaspard. Not for us. Just for you." I took it, feeling the paper under my fingers, thick as an unsolved chapter. "What is it?" I asked. "Open it when you're ready," he said, and didn't add anything else. I sat in the car outside the coffee shop for a long time, as if the road itself could not let me go back to my usual reality, as if the glass walls of the car had become a temporary shelter from a world in which the past had suddenly returned and demanded attention again. The envelope was lying unopened on the passenger seat, and there was something menacing in its silence, in its apparent innocence, as if there might be hidden in it a force capable of changing everything that I had so carefully and patiently built over the past months. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to destroy this gesture, to prevent explanation or repentance from penetrating my walls, for which I fought so desperately. But there was another part, the quiet but persistent part, the part that learned to listen not to other people's expectations, but to its own desires, and that part wanted to know. When I got home, I took off my coat without turning on the light, went into the kitchen and, sitting down at the table, finally opened the envelope. Inside was a cash receipt, $75,000. My heart stopped beating for a moment. There was a note next to it, short and unevenly written, with the same handwriting that I remembered from the scraps of paper that he left when he went out into the night or justified his disappearance. "Enrica. This is not even the beginning of paying off what I owe for all the years of alimony. But this is just the beginning. No strings attached. Use it for yourself, not for Gaspard. You deserve a life after motherhood." I stared at the receipt for a long time, and then at these words. Everything was boiling inside, anger that he dared to think that money could compensate for years of pain and loneliness, relief because there was freedom in those numbers that I had never allowed myself, and suspicion, inevitable like a cold wind. What was behind it? And yet, underneath it all, there's something else, quiet, barely audible, a voice whispering a question that I've always put off until later. What would you do if you could do anything? That night, I called Adriana. "Do you remember once saying that everyone has a story?" I asked when she answered. "Yes," she said simply, as if she knew I wasn't talking about yesterday. "I think I'm ready to tell mine. Not just the parts about being Gaspard's mother. The whole story." She didn't ask any unnecessary questions. "I'm listening," she just said, and for the first time in many years, I began to speak not as Gaspard's mother, not as David's ex-wife, but as a woman, Enrica, with her dreams, with her wounds, with her unfinished story, which is still unfolding, no matter what. The opening of the gallery exceeded all expectations. The evening was lively, the studio was filled with light, quiet music and a multitude of voices that merged into a common rhythm, reminiscent of a bubbling stream in spring. Adriana transformed the space. Soft lighting, simple but expressive expositions made even the most modest works full of meaning and emotion. My collection, 5 ceramic pieces in total, each of which was a visual echo of my inner journey over the past year, occupied a modest corner by the windows, where the light played on the surface of the glaze, enlivening it like a breath of inspiration. Adriana appeared next to me, elegant, in a long blue dress I'd never seen before, and I felt a pang of anxiety as I smoothed the folds of my new silk blouse, a small extravagance bought with David's money. The check was still in the drawer, almost untouched. I wasn't ready to do anything important with him yet, but I allowed myself at least this much clothes in which I felt not only appropriate, but also beautiful. "Don't be afraid," she said, handing me a glass of wine. "Your work speaks for itself." And, after a pause, she added, "And speaking of speaking for yourself, there is someone here who would like to meet you." She pointed to a tall man with salt and pepper gray hair and thin metal-rimmed glasses, who was standing at my stand and carefully examining my ceramics, as if trying to read something hidden in them. "Who is this?" I whispered. "Alessandro Gray, the owner of the gallery in the center. He teaches at a college. He's interested in your point of view." My stomach clenched. My point of view? I used to hide behind the work, behind the clay, behind the bowls, which could tell more than my words. But now, "Your work tells a story, Enrica." "Strong," Adriana said, gently pushing me forward. I walked over. Alessandro looked up, and his expression cleared. "Are you Enrica?" "Adriana told me about you." He held out his hand, and I touched it lightly, feeling strangely calm in this acquaintance. "These works are wonderful." "Thank you," I replied, a little confused, but with sincerity. Although I'm not sure if "wonderful" is the right word. I'm still learning. "Aren't we all?" he smiled. "What particularly attracted me was the honesty of your work. These are not just vessels. These are expressions of transformation." I looked at my work, the first, rough, uneven, almost falling apart, the second, a little stronger, but still with mistakes, the third, the one in which for the first time I put not just effort, but feeling. The last one is a bowl with gold patches, where it was broken and glued by me, like the ancient Japanese kintsugi technique, where the scars are not hidden, but are emphasized with gold, as a memory of pain, from which beauty is born. "That's insightful," I said, surprised that someone saw it as more than just clay and glaze. "I've been making art for over 40 years, he said softly. "And I learned to recognize honesty, not skill. Your work is honest. It's rare." And at that moment, surrounded by light, people, work, and words that didn't require excuses, I realized that I really started talking. Not only through clay. Through myself. "I'm particularly impressed with this work," he said, fixing his gaze on the bowl with golden veins, and there was not just polite interest in his voice, but genuine admiration, which I hadn't heard in someone's intonation for a long time, if ever. "Inspired by the kintsugi technique?" "Yes," I nodded, feeling a soft, warm feeling of recognition spread in my chest, not ostentatious, but real. I've always liked the way the Japanese treat cracks, not as something shameful that needs to be disguised, but as a part of history that should be emphasized, given to hurt due. I believe that our scars can be our most beautiful features if we learn to respect them. We talked for almost an hour, standing against the wall where my works were placed apart, as if by themselves, a little apart from other exhibitions, but therefore only more significant. The conversation was light, not in the sense that it was superficial. On the contrary, it turned out to be surprisingly deep, but light in the way it developed naturally, without tension, with that rare quality when the other person is not just waiting for his turn to speak, but really listens. Alessandro asked questions, clarified, and was interested, not out of professional curiosity, but out of inner involvement. When he finally asked if I would like to participate in an upcoming exhibition at his gallery dedicated to aspiring local artists, I surprised myself. I answered yes, without the slightest hesitation, as if this confidence had always lived in me, just waiting for the right moment to manifest itself. When the evening was coming to an end, he handed me a business card, thick, creamy, with embossed lettering, with his name and phone number, and with some special aura of attentiveness. "I enjoyed our conversation, Enrica," he said slowly, as if tasting the words. "Maybe we could continue it over dinner." I stared at the card, trying to figure out if I was imagining all this. After all, it had been so long since no one had shown interest in me, not as someone's mother, not as a teacher, not as an older woman, but simply as a person, as a woman with her own world. "I'd like that," I finally said, stuffing the card into my jacket pocket, feeling my lips form a small, uninvited, but real smile. "Wonderful," he said. "I'll call you next week." After he left, Adriana immediately appeared next to him, her eyebrows raised in a silent but very expressive question. "Don't start," I warned her, fighting the growing amusement inside. "I didn't say anything," she replied, and took my hand. "But if I did, it would only be that Alessandro is a wonderful person. He was widowed 5 years ago. And, by the way, I didn't show any interest in anyone until tonight." The possibility of romance at my age seemed both ridiculous and exciting, as if the youth I hadn't had time to enjoy had decided to belatedly remind me of myself. But before I could afford to explore this new, exciting, frightening path, I had unfinished business. The next morning, I went to the Nazareth Rehabilitation Center. I didn't tell Gaspard that I was coming. We hadn't spoken since he left my apartment, leaving behind a void and an echo of unspoken words. But after meeting David and everything I learned, an urgent need was born in me, to see my son, not to tell him something, not to condemn or forgive him, but just to understand where he is now, who he is becoming. Nazareth turned out to be completely different from what I imagined it to be. I expected gray concrete walls, sterile corridors, and strict security, but instead I saw a spacious area surrounded by greenery, with manicured gardens, walking paths, and houses that looked more like cozy country cottages than a medical facility. In the reception area, I gave my name and asked for Gaspard. The young woman behind the counter asked politely but firmly, "Are you on his list of approved visitors?" "I'm his mother," I replied, and suddenly realized how correct and bitter that phrase sounded. "But probably not. He doesn't know I'm coming." The employee looked at me sympathetically, but shook her head. "I'm sorry, but our tenants must approve of all visitors. This is part of their autonomy and recovery. Do you want to leave a message?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Tell him that Enrica Mitchell came to visit him." I paused, choosing my words, "and that I respect his boundaries. I'll wait until it's ready." I left my phone number, even though I knew he already knew it, and went out into the garden. I had come all this way and needed at least a few minutes of peace to get ready for the return trip. I sat on a bench by the pond, watching the carp lazily glide in the water under the wide water lilies, and allowed myself to forget about everything, just to be. "Mom?" I turned around, and Gaspard was standing in front of me. He looked different, familiar, but alien, like a man you once knew but are now meeting anew. He lost weight, his face became sharper, the lines of his cheekbones became clearer, but the main thing was in his eyes. They were as clear as I hadn't seen them in years. "Gaspard," I gasped, getting up, not knowing what to do. Hug him? Shake hands? Keep your distance? He resolved my indecision by stepping forward and wrapping me in a hug, quick, awkward, but warm, alive, real. "They said you were here." I should have called first. Gaspard's voice sounded a little quieter than I remembered, not uncertain, but rather deliberate, as if every word was the result of an internal dialogue lived before it got on the tongue. I apologized. "I know you said you weren't ready for meetings yet." "It's okay," he replied, and gestured to the bench next to me. We both sat down, slowly, as if there was something ritualistic about this movement that had been overdue for a long time. "I was actually thinking of calling you," he continued, choosing his words as if trying them on himself. "My consultant thinks it's time." There was a silence between us, the same heavy and viscous one, saturated with everything that had not been said in months, years, and a life in which we were often close, but too rarely truly together. We both started talking at the same time, and this moment, strange, almost comical, lightened the atmosphere, allowing us to exchange a quiet, awkward, but sincere laugh. "You first," I suggested, and he nodded, taking a deep breath, like a swimmer diving into the depths. I have to apologize, he began, and his voice was not as stubborn as usual, but open, vulnerable. For a lot, actually. For the cruise. For the way I talked to you in your apartment back then. For all the life I've taken your love for granted. I thought that you would always be there, without conditions. I'm sorry, Mom. It's really a pity. These words, which I had been waiting for so long, did not bring me a victorious feeling, did not cause me triumph or satisfaction. Instead, I felt a quiet, deep sadness, for the years, for empty promises, for mutual omissions. Thanks, was all I said. It really means a lot. I'm working on the steps, he continued. Fearless moral analysis. Not the most pleasant thing. He grinned ironically, but without malice. It turns out that I've been angry all my life. At Dad for leaving. At you for staying. At myself for not being able to keep him by my side. Oh, gasped. My heart sank. Your father's choice was never your fault. I know that, he nodded. But this little boy inside of me still doesn't believe. He still feels inadequate. I remembered all those moments when I tried to fill the void left by David, with gifts, attention, silent acceptance, endless justification. All those times when I let his behavior overstep the boundaries because I was afraid of losing at least some kind of connection. I've made mistakes too, I confessed. I thought I could love you for both of us. To give you everything you've been missing. But sometimes my love wasn't a concern, but something painful for both of us. He nodded, and there was no condemnation in his face. My consultant calls it an incentive. The takeover. She says we need to build healthier boundaries. He paused, then looked at me carefully. Dad said that you know that we talked. Yes, I replied. He mentioned that you called him. He said you had coffee last week. He's in town. I know. He came yesterday. Gaspard looked away, looking at the pond. It was difficult. He said he was also recovering. 5 years of sobriety. What do you think about it? I asked carefully, trying not to direct, not to push, but only to understand. He thought about it. At first I was angry. Where was that maturity when I was growing up? Why wasn't he like that then? But then, I understood. I'm on my way too. Who am I to judge his timing, his pace? His maturity surprised me. This was no longer the same boy who screamed and ran away, blaming the whole world for his misfortunes. He was a man who was starting to figure himself out. He said that he wants to restore relations. I do not know if it will work. Or how it should be. It's your choice, I replied. No one can mistake him for you. He turned to me, and there was no stubbornness in his gaze, only sincerity. And us, Mom? Can we recover too? The question hung in the air like a thin pause between inhaling and exhaling. I thought about everything we've been through, all the pain and all the attempts, not always successful, but always driven by love. I think we can, I finally said. But this time it's different. For real. With respect. With borders. With mutual responsibility. He smiled, uncertainly but genuinely. My counselor suggested family therapy. When I'm ready, would you consider it? Yes, I said. I would consider it. We talked a little more, without the heaviness, with the lightness that comes when something important shifts inside. I told him about ceramics, about the gallery, about myself, not as a mother, not as a figure of the past, but as a woman who began to create life anew. He listened attentively, nodding, and when I mentioned Alessandro, his face changed slightly, but he didn't say anything superfluous, just noticed that it sounded unexpected, but good. And in this short meeting, in this conversation full of pauses, confessions and, finally, calmness, I felt not that everything was healed, but that at least we had found the way to the beginning of something else, real, alive, suffered. Gaspard listened with real interest, without interrupting, without looking away, asking questions that showed that he was really listening, not out of politeness, but because he wanted to understand, as if for the first time in all these years he saw in me a person separate from motherhood, from all those endless roles in which I existed, caring, accessible, sacrificial. He saw me as a woman, not a function. And this feeling, unexpected and tremulous, awakened in me at the same time gratitude and a slight longing for those years when everything could still be started from scratch, not in hindsight, but in the moment. When it was time to leave, we walked together along the paved path to the parking lot. We walked in silence, but there was no tension, just the realization that we had already crossed an important line. Before getting into the car, I stopped and turned to him. "I want you to know something, Gaspard. It is important." I took a deep breath, feeling the words fall into place. "I'm proud of you for doing this hard work, for every step you take. But my life no longer revolves around your recovery. I love you. But now I'm building something for myself." He nodded, slowly, deliberately. "That's good, Mom. That's how it should be." When I started the engine and drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. Gaspard stood with his hands in his pockets and watched me drive away, getting smaller and smaller in his field of vision. But instead of the old pain that usually squeezed my heart after every meeting, I felt something new. Hope. With a touch of freedom. It feels like we've both finally stopped being hostages of our past. My phone rang just as I pulled onto the highway. Adriana's name popped up on the screen, and I answered with a slight smile. "How did it go?" "What is it?" she asked, her voice as warm as the spring air. "Better than I expected," I replied. "But that's not the reason for your call, is it?" Her voice trembled with restrained excitement. "Do you remember that Art Council grant I mentioned? A grant for programs for working with the elderly at a local center? So, they're looking for a pottery teacher. It's paid for, Enrica. And I suggested your candidacy. They want to interview you next week." I almost missed the turn. "Adriana. I've only been doing this for a year." I began, but she interrupted me with gentle insistence. "Yes, but you're a natural teacher. And you find contact with people, especially those who, like you, began to build a new life at an age that society mistakenly considers to be completing rather than beginning. Say yes." The motorway stretches out in front of me, wide and inviting, as a symbol of all these new roads that have opened up in front of me. Pottery teaching. Showing my work in the gallery. Dinner with Alessandro. Family therapy with Gaspard. All these possibilities are not accidental, not forced, but chosen by me. At the age of 65. An age that once seemed like the end to me. "Enrica, are you still on the line?" Adriana's voice rang out, bringing me back to the moment. I smiled, looking at the road, where the sun was beginning to gild the horizon. "Yes." "Tell them yes." "Are you sure about this?" "What is it?" she asked as we loaded the last boxes of clay and tools into my car together after another class. It was dawn, the sky was turning soft pink and gold, and the street was still dozing, just waking up from the night silence. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said, closing the trunk. "It feels right. It's been 6 months since that morning visit to Nazareth. 6 months filled with changes, as I learned to let go, accept, and rebuild my relationships, with myself, with Gaspard, and with the world. Doors opened and closed, but each one led to a new room, to a new horizon. Alessandro and I began to see each other regularly, leisurely dinners, joint exhibitions, walks along quiet streets where we discussed art and life, and just kept silent next to each other, not needing words. His kindness was unobtrusive, almost invisible, but that was her strength. He was there, not demanding, not speeding up, but just letting me be. My pottery classes at the senior center were the joy of my week. There, I saw my story reflected in every student. Women and men who had once forgotten about their dreams now rediscovered the opportunity to create, be, and breathe deeply. Their stories were full of pain, loss, but also hope. And in their grateful glances, I felt like I had completely returned to the world, not as a reflection of someone's needs, but as an independent entity. And Gaspard. He completed his 90 days in Nazareth, and now lived in a rehabilitation center closer to the city. We talked every week. Sometimes it was short calls, sometimes we had coffee together in a cozy corner where we could just sit, be silent, or discuss how the day went. Our conversations have become different. More honest. More mature. He shared his difficulties, not complaining, but analyzing, trying to understand himself. He began working as an assistant consultant in an outpatient program, helping others who had just started the path he himself was going through. And more often he talked about plans, not ephemeral, not dreams in the air, but about something real. He was thinking of going to college, studying psychology, and specializing in addiction. And listening to him, I no longer waited, did not freeze in fear of a possible fall. I was just there, not as a rescuer, but as a mother, someone who loves, but knows that love is not a sacrifice, but a choice. And in this mature, calm love, and in my new world, where I was not only a mother, I finally began to feel that I was living my real life. "You seem happy," he remarked at our last meeting, and there was not a simple observation in his voice, but a quiet, almost reverent surprise, as if for the first time in many years he saw me like this, whole, calm, not broken, not striving to be for someone else. "I'm somehow lighter," I replied without thinking, because it was true, because a feeling of freedom really settled in my chest, not ephemeral, not illusory, but internal, based on the fact that I finally began to live for myself. "It matters," I said, and he nodded with the thoughtfulness of a man who understands that his path is parallel to mine, but unique. "I'm trying too. I'm learning this." His relationship with David developed slowly, but with the cautious confidence with which people who had been separated for a long time try to build a bridge again. They had lunch once every 2 weeks, not more often, so as not to overdo it, not less often, so as not to lose the rhythm. I did not interfere, I did not ask questions, I did not try to influence. This path belonged to them, and I knew that my place was near, but not in the center. Sometimes he told me what they discussed, his childhood, David's attempts to be honest about the past, about weaknesses that only became clearer over the years. And I listened, grateful that Gaspard was now able to have a conversation without accusations, without drama, with that calmness that comes when pain is processed rather than denied. And now a new chapter was beginning. The biggest change I've ever consciously chosen. "I still can't believe you're moving to the coast," Adriana said, leaning against my car, her eyes glistening with tears, but she was smiling. "What made you decide?" I smiled back, remembering the evening when everything finally fell into place. I was sitting on the terrace of Alessandro's beach house, wrapped in a light blanket, with a glass of wine in my hand, watching the sun sink into the ocean, turning the water the colors of amber and copper. Then he said casually, as if in passing, "A cottage for rent nearby. Have you ever thought about living by the sea?" This question turned out to be more than just a random suggestion. It was the quiet bell that suddenly rang and made me realize what was keeping me in the city. The answer was simple: nothing. Gaspard went his own way, Adriana was by my side, but no longer my support, but my partner in life. And I was free to choose. "The city keeps my story alive," I told her then, "but I'm ready to start writing a new one." "I'm going to miss you terribly," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "It's only 2 hours away," I reminded her, smiling. "And you're always welcome. I already have a place for a second potter's wheel." We planned for her to come every month, and Alessandro enthusiastically offered to turn a spacious garage into a makeshift studio with drying shelves, work desks, and even a small showcase if I suddenly decided to teach in small groups. The gallery in the city center happily agreed to continue presenting my work, despite the distance, and I finally allowed myself to use some of David's money, which had been lying in a drawer for a long time, burdened with shame and doubts, but which now became a symbol of my new beginning. I had enough to live without need for at least 2 years. For the first time in my life, I made a choice that was not dictated by necessity, but based on desire. "Text me when you get there," Adriana said, wiping her eyes. And the photos came. "I want to see this ocean view that you still can't get away from." "I promise," I nodded, getting into the car. I felt a strange mixture of sadness, gratitude, and delight, as if on the border between a known past and an as yet unformulated but alluring future. "Thank you, Adriana. For everything." "Don't be so sentimental," she chuckled through her tears. "Just go and create something beautiful by the sea." The trip took a little longer than usual. I stopped every now and then to sip coffee, stretch my legs, and take photos of landscapes that seemed new even in familiar places. I wrote Gaspard a short message. "I'm on schedule. I kiss you." He helped me pack my things the previous weekend, and his concentration, attention to detail, and restraint surprised me. He even fixed the light of my old armchair, the one where I used to read fairy tales to him. "I'm trying to be helpful," he said then. "It's not easy, present." I nodded silently, realizing that I didn't need any more words. The cottage was just as I remembered it, small, with sun-bleached gray tiles, and blue shutters that creaked in the sea wind. A stone path surrounded by beach roses led to the door, and from the windows you could see the ocean, alive, endless, changing. Alessandro met me on the porch, and without wasting time on the ceremony, we began unloading the car, arranging furniture, boxes, books, dishes. We worked as a couple who had been getting used to each other for a long time, each feeling the rhythm of the other, with stops for sandwiches and tea on the tiny deck, where the wind played in my hair and his hand casually touched mine. And in this simplicity of the moment, in the soft sound of the surf, in the light coming through the curtains, I felt at home. Not just in a new place, but in a new chapter. The one that I wrote not because I had to, but because I wanted to. He became thoughtful, noticing my momentary silence while I was looking at the waves, and, like a sensitive person, he did not rush me with an answer, just waited, giving space to my thoughts while I looked from the endless pulsation of the horizon to his face. "Not at all," I finally said, turning to him with a slight smile that reflected a surge of gratitude for this man, whose presence in my life was not only unexpected, but also surprisingly natural, as if he had always been somewhere nearby, just waiting for the moment to appear, and now standing on this deserted beach, under the September sky, I felt like fate, with its strange sense of humor, sometimes gives us generous gifts when we least expect them. "I'm just thinking how amazing life is," I added. A year ago, I was standing alone in a cruise port, feeling like my life was over. And now? "What is it?" he asked softly, and there was no pressure in his voice, only genuine interest. "And now," I repeated, looking at him, "I feel like it's just beginning." After Alessandro left, promising to return in the morning to help with the remaining boxes and hang the curtains, I went down to the sea without turning on the lights in the house. The September evening was surprisingly warm, the beach was deserted from the hustle and bustle, and the silence, broken only by the dull rhythm of the surf, enveloped like a soft blanket. I took off my shoes, letting the cool sand caress my feet, and walked along the water's edge, where the waves gently washed my ankles, leaving behind a frothy pattern that instantly disappeared into the darkening sand. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a short message from Gaspard: "Everything is fine. Everything is really fine." I froze in place, smiled, feeling something heavy leave my heart, as if he had come by himself, took my hand and made it clear that he had found his footing. I replied, "It's okay. The ocean sends its greetings." The answer came almost immediately: "Tell him I'll be there soon. I love you, Mom." 3 simple words that have now become sacred, filled with meaning, sincerity, free from previous manipulations, from dependence. I wrote back, "I love you too," and putting my phone away, I walked along the shore again, letting the waves whisper their eternal stories while I thought about the path that brought me here. I thought about the pain that had accompanied me for many years, about disappointment, about loneliness, about the guilt that I wore like a shirt. But at the same time, I also remembered gifts that were unexpected and wonderful. Friendship with Adriana, who reminded me of who I am, pottery, which became my way of expression, my form of meditation, the caring, careful attention of Alessandro, who admired not only my art, but also myself, and the new, mature, healthy relationship with her son, who finally had balance, respect, and genuine intimacy. When the sky finally darkened and the first stars lit up, I returned to the cottage, turned on the warm light in the kitchen and, with a cup of chamomile tea, unpacked the last box, my pottery tools, packs of clay, brushes and paints, everything that has always been with me, even when it seemed that I was losing myself. Tomorrow I will install a potter's wheel by the window overlooking the sea to create new works inspired by this place, these waters, this wind that brings the smell of salt and freedom. I stood in the doorway, cup in hand, and looked up at the black velvet sky studded with stars, listening to the waves repeat the same word, live. For so long, I defined myself solely as Gaspard's mother, as David's abandoned wife, as a woman who exists for the sake of others. These roles were still a part of me, imprinted on my skin, on my heart, in my memory, but now they did not limit, did not hold, did not define my present. I was Enrica, an artist, a teacher, a friend, a lover, and, yes, still a mother, but a mother on her own terms, with boundaries, with an inner world, with the right to her own happiness and to choose who to be and how to live. I remembered that day at the port when the cruise ship, full of promises and illusions, left without me, as I stood alone, with a floral suitcase, with an unused passport, and photographed myself to save the moment, not realizing that I was photographing not a defeat, but a starting point. I thought I had lost, but in reality I just handed over the baggage of the past and freed my hands. Now, looking at these stars, I realized that then a real journey began, not along the coast, but into the depths of myself, not to distant lands, but to a new, authentic existence. I closed the cottage door, locking it not from the world, but from old fears, and turned to the house, which had already begun to breathe with me, in unison, like a heart that had just returned to rhythm. At the age of 65, I finally realized that there is no right time to start. There is only a willingness to accept that sometimes the only way to truly hold on to yourself is to let go. Letting go of the past, expectations, pain, and give yourself permission to hope. Because hope is not naivety, but courage. And understanding this, even if gained at the cost of years, is the greatest of freedoms. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.